All right, now joining us on Tennis Channel Inside In. Really appreciate having him on the podcast. He was a premier veteran umpire in pro tennis for several decades, was the ATP Supervisor, accomplished a lot of great things. Now, as a tournament director, keeping that tradition alive, he is the tournament director for the Beijing Open, which will be found on Tennis Channel September 25th to October 6th, the only combined event in Asia. Lars Graff, a man with an incredible story, a lot to talk about on today's show. Lars, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here with you, even if I'm on the other side of the world. And communication is not that easy all the time, but I'm really happy to see you and be here with you.
Well, I appreciate that, Lars. Yeah, you're actually on the other side of the world. I'm actually talking to someone in the future because it's Wednesday now. It's Tuesday in California.
Exactly.
No, and I wanted to get to your story. We're going to talk a lot about the Beijing Open, but from your upbringing, and it's just so fascinating because you grew up in Sweden. You had this entire life as an umpire that started from the ground floor. 1974, I think we're coming up on 50 years. You were a 14-year-old kid who got the itch, had the connections in Bastad where your family's from, your parents and grandparents. So at 14 years old, is that right? That's when this entire journey, you in tennis, you in umpiring began?
In Sweden, we had a system when I grew up that when you play junior tournaments, whoever lost the match had to umpire the next match.
Wow.
And as a junior, I lost more than I won. But it was not only me. I was with Michael Permfors last week in Boston, and we had a little chat with some people there at the Longwood Cricket Club. And he said it was the same thing for him. He lost more than he won when he was a junior. So he also did my matches. And Mats Wilander, Stefan Edberg, all those Swedish guys, they had to umpire. And I was one of them. And you probably got $1 per set. And that was enough for an ice cream or, some snacks or whatever. So that's really how it started. And I was in Båstad, which is called the Swedish tennis Mecca. And that was the most popular place in Sweden for tennis. I was very fortunate to be there.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story. That rule, I just said wow during it because it's an interesting system. I don't know if Americans would adapt to it too much, but it gives you great perspective of how tennis works from all angles. So that started at 14. You were playing junior tennis, as you knew, as you said. But were you thinking career at a certain point? Like, when did that transition change to, okay, this is something that I'm kind of doing well at, I'm succeeding. Can I make a career out of this? At what point in your life did you really start to take things seriously as an umpire?
It's probably 1990 when I got a call from ATP, asked if I want to be a professional chair umpire or try it. So before that, it wasn't a hobby. And I was very fortunate because Sweden, as you know, played 7 Davis Cup finals in a row. So I was a line umpire in all those Davis Cup matches in Sweden. And at that time, Davis Cup had a great format because it was home and away. And Sweden basically every year had at least 2 home matches. And at that time, Sweden was in a called World Group at that time. And I remember my first Davis Cup final. It was in Gothenburg in 1984. And Sweden played United States. And I was on the service line. And that was the best lesson. John McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, Peter Fleming and McEnroe in doubles. And playing against the Swedes. And indoors, Sweden put indoors clay in Gothenburg. And Sweden won. That was the first. It was actually the second time Sweden won Davis Cup. They won in '75 when I beat the Czechoslovakia in Stockholm. But this was the second, and this was the start of the really Swedish, dominance in tennis. So I was lucky. I was in Davis Cup line umpire for at least twice a year in big matches in Sweden. And then, of course, Sweden had 2 tennis tournaments. We had the Stockholm Open, which was an indoor tournament, and at that time was a very high rated tournament. It was before the 1,000 and 500 and 250 started. So Stockholm was actually a super serious tournament. So it was equivalent to today's 1,000. And there was always the top players playing in Stockholm. So I was there, and started as a line umpire. And then after a while, when I get a little older, they started asking me if I want to do matches in qualifying. So I got a match here and there in qualifying. And then it developed. it developed. And Båstad was the tennis mecca, as I told you, and we had a clay court event there, and it was a 250, a little lower than Stockholm, a little less prize money, but there was also very good players. So I learned through the tournaments in Sweden, and it was just a hobby.
Yeah, you worked your way up like a pro would. And also, you bring up the 84 Davis Cup, Macaron Connors. It's like the phrase trial by fire. That's like trial by incinerator. Like, all right, let's just throw him out to the real wolves. But they're surviving. And as I said, kind of working your way up through how it works and understanding what it takes to be an umpire. Your perspective is one that I think a lot of people don't quite get. How did you balance being, finding your style, not, that fine line, Lars, between being, firm in what you call and what you do, but not being combative? Because that's where, in my opinion, and a lot of others, that's where the great umpires lie, is how do you balance that line of I'm going to be firm, but I'm not going to be combative with players out there?
I think I balanced it because I was playing myself as a junior. So all the Swedish guys, they respected me.
Right.
They knew me. I played against Michael Permfors. I played against Simonsson. I played against a lot of those guys, and they knew me. So I knew that communication was the key to success. And in this situation, when you play yourself and you go into umpiring, if you don't know the game, I think it's impossible to be a good umpire. I'm not saying you have to be a good player, but you have to have the feeling. I could never be an umpire in baseball because I don't know baseball. I didn't grow up with baseball. I grew up in Sweden with hockey. So I think the communication was the key to success. And that's also the second thing is, of course, always treat the players the same. It doesn't matter if you do a match on court number 19 or you do a match on center court. The player should always know that you do the same thing wherever you are. If it is a code violation, you give a code violation on court 19, or you give it on center court, and treat all the players fairly. You have to show that. You have to earn the respect.
Right.
But I remember many years ago when I was working when I started working for ATP, and there was some guys asking. There was actually one of the tour managers asked the players. He said, "What do you think about this new guy, the Swedish umpire?" Yep. And one of the players told him, "How can we criticize a guy who comes from the same country as Stefan Edberg?" So I had, of course, a little advantage by being Swedish, and all the Swedish players were so well respected, and people knew I came from the same country as those guys. But it was tough. You had to learn. I remember my first time in the States. I was working in Scottsdale, Arizona, and the supervisor was a Brazilian supervisor, Eduardo Menga. He said, "Lars, I know you're supposed to go to next tournament at that week. I think it was Los Angeles, UCLA at that time. I was 3 tournaments I'm working. But he said, I have a match for you tomorrow, so you have to stay 1 more day longer." I said, "Okay, you get a doubles match tomorrow." And this was on Friday. And at that time, there was no computers or anything. So, we got a little paper. And in the morning, I got a little paper, see what match I did. And I was supposed to do a doubles semifinal. It was David Pate, Scott Davis, Kevin Curran, and Johan Creek.
Yeah, some names. There's some names in there. Yeah,
and I can tell you, from the first point of the match, I was on my toes. From the first point, things were just, overrules. Line umpire forgot to move to the center service line. Ball kid drops the ball. And I remember once in the beginning of the match, David Pate just passes me, looks at me and say, "You're arrogant." Out of nowhere, you say, "You're arrogant." Like just try to intimidate me. And that was a very tough match. And I survived that one, but I learned quickly, you have to be, you're on thin ice all the time. I call it the changeover is the 90 seconds diplomacy. When you talk to the players and, you try to, any fire is there, you try to get them out as quick as possible.
I like that. That's a really good phrase, and I think that's one example. I was going to ask you too, if you have another or any examples of when you were coming up or even when you were more established where you had to be firm, you had to give a player bad news. But if they did respect you, if you caught up with them maybe after the match or later, where they said, "Okay, we understand where you were coming from," because I think you come from a certain approach that a lot of people have, that it's competitive, it's heated, but we're going to leave it out on the court. It's not going to fester. We're just going to do our jobs, do our best, and then we can move past this. Do you have any stories of maybe giving a player bad news where they respected you for it later?
I mean, there are a lot of players I have given bad news, and then I think that one of the baddest news I ever gave was probably I was doing the final in Cincinnati against Pete Sampras against Pat Rafter, and I had the overall on the match point, and it was a very tough match. And of course, the crowd wasn't happy, and there was game set the match Rafter, and then after the match, I had to get down from the chair and get out of it, and that moment, they had a. I think the Cincinnati Enquirer they had a pool, which was the most dramatic moment or most special moment in the Cincinnati story, Cincinnati tournament, and this was number one. Yeah. So anyhow, I did this and made an overrule, and it was like an instinct. Fault, correction ball was good, game set match Rafter. So then I remember after the match, Pete was not happy, and Rafter, they asked him in the press conference, "What do you think about the overrule?" He said it was a beauty. That was Rafter's say. But anyhow, I left to Indianapolis, and we drove from Cincinnati to Indianapolis. When I came to Indianapolis, there were two guys waiting for me in the lobby. One was Todd Martin. Say, "Lars, what you did, everybody should do. Then this world got much easier." And then it was Alex Correia, basically say the same thing, "Lars, well done." Because they knew that this was a very tough situation for me because the newspaper, everybody was talking about it. So they were there like to support me. Two of the bigger players supported me. And that felt very good. And of course, I didn't umpire any matches with Pete for a while because, it's when you have a heated situation with a player, it's important, to stay away from the player for a while. So next time I umpire Pete was in Paris-Bercy against Greg Rusetsky in the final. Okay. Best of 5 sets, which was at that time. And Pete didn't know anything. So I walk out on the court, and Pete walks out on the court, the crowd, and then he sees me. He didn't say anything. It was just like normal, coming up to the coin toss. And of course, Pete lost that match to Rusetsky in a tough match. And indoors carpet, no Hawkeye, nothing. But it went well. And after that, I umpired many more Pete matches. But, when something happened, it doesn't mean that you have been wrong. But sometimes, when there is a tension between a player and an official, it's better to stay away for a while. Time heals all wounds.
Yeah, most wounds, they do. I'm sure of it. You mentioned it with Hawkeye, and you're another perfect person to ask on this. So we've got Hawkeye. We've got it in most events now. There's always going to be issues with video review and, the process. But I think a lot of people agree that it's a benefit to have by and large in the sport. My question to you has there been an effect from your vantage point on umpiring? Because one of the common sentiments is maybe umpires don't have to do as much anymore. Are they necessarily as sharp given that there is now video review and video review and also Hawkeye? So do you think that impact has been felt, that maybe umpires don't have to be as sharp anymore given what we've seen with Hawkeye being implemented?
I honestly tell you, there has been a tremendous effect on bringing Hawkeye in, because umpires now don't have to call the balls anymore. They wait for Hawkeye to call them. Right. So when something else happens in a match, when there is a touch, when there is a not up, we have seen several incidents, in the summer. We don't have to mention names or anybody, but there have been several incidents in the summer. There were several incidents in other tournaments because umpires are not used to make decisions. So when the thing happening is like before, you called everything. You have to make decisions all the time. So I think there has been a big impact on officiating. And I personally think that if I was in charge, all the umpires, they should work in challengers. If you are a professional umpire on the highest level, you should work a couple of challengers a year, because in the challengers, there is no Hawkeye, there is no electronic line calling, and then you have to make the calls because it pacifies. I think electronic line calling pacifies the umpires. And there are very few umpires who makes overrules today because they're afraid to be wrong. There are some who jump in, and they are one of the most respected ones. We don't have to mention names there either, but one of the most respected umpires is today. He makes calls, and even if he's wrong, the players have so much respect for him because they prefer him to be wrong once or twice, or her to be wrong once or twice, but being active, showing that they're they're part of the match. So I think that there has been unfortunately, some negative effects on officiating. It's great for the players. We want the players to be 100% right. We don't want anybody to lose a match because of a bad call. But we also need to train the officials so they can handle, the problems which happen in the match, which is not related to if the ball is in or out.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with all that. And you mentioned something earlier. You grew up in Sweden with hockey. I grew up playing hockey over here in the States. It's similar, right? You want a referee or an umpire to just take a little control, because if there's no control, then it just turns into a giant mess and everybody's arguing and fighting and it's just disarray. So I hear exactly what you're saying on that point. And again, we don't have to name names, but it's a big point to say here. Lars, I do want to say, while we'll wrap up the umpiring part of this, you got to reach the gold badge status. We're a premier umpire, and you also called some pretty big matches in that chair. None bigger, in my opinion, than that Federer Roddick match in 2009 at Wimbledon. What was the experience like for you being the umpire for a Wimbledon final, a thrilling final, and then also just having a little bit of pressure? Did you feel the nerves? Was it a surreal moment? How did you stay in the moment and do your job well in that best of five-set thriller with Roddick and Federer?
I mean, that was the biggest honor I could get, and any umpire can get, to do a Wimbledon final, to do a Grand Slam final. So, of course, I had to prepare for that. And, of course, I was nervous. If you're not nervous, you're not going to do a good job, I was, the night before, I was very moderate in my food intake and drank, a little water. In the morning when I woke up, I didn't drink any water because I know this match can last a long time. And it's not only the match, I had to be on court like almost half an hour before. And then there's a prize ceremony. So it ended up in like almost 6 hours that I was under pressure and I couldn't run away to go to the bathroom. So there was a lot of pressure and you have to deal with the pressure. I mean, I tell you, when you start the match and, you're going on court, you do the coin toss and all that, that's fine. And then you go up in the chair, you say 2 minutes. It's fine. People are talking. It's a lot of noise. 1 minute. And then you say time. When you say time, suddenly it quietens down. And then you say first set, Roger Federer to serve. Suddenly it's completely quiet. You can hear yourself breathing. You're sitting up there and everybody's focusing on these two players playing a match. And you're sitting there and everything that you say is going to be out in the world. And that is, of course, the thing has changed also since I was umpiring. Today, if an umpire makes a mistake, it's on YouTube within 1 minute. So that puts a lot of pressure on umpires too. But I mean, there was a lot of pressure on the match, and you have to focus. You have to, have different methods to think. Maybe if you start thinking losing concentration, you have to think about something yellow because the tennis balls are yellow. You have to think, you have to motivate yourself, keep the concentration, because it's not only about if the ball is in or out. Some umpires you can say they score wrongly, or there has been situations where umpire misses a ball change or something happens. The players have to go to the bathroom, whatever. So there is a lot of pressure, and you have to deal with it. And I would not be ready for a Wimbledon final when I started umpiring. When I was in Scottsdale, when I was 87. I would not be ready for Wimbledon final. It took a long time to get ready for a Wimbledon final. And then, of course, I was fortunate to do another Wimbledon final with Serena and Radwanska, 2012, my last year. Wimbledon is special, so it's an institution, and you have to respect the institution, and it's not normal umpiring when you go on a center court in Wimbledon. And of course, you have to be very clear with your voice. You have to pronounce the 40-15 in the correct way. It's not like you sit on an outside court in a smaller tournament and no one is listening except the players. But in Wimbledon, everybody can hear every word you say.
Yeah, when you call that Wimbledon women's final, when you umpire that with Serena and Radwanska becoming the first to call both, a true honor there. Yeah, I imagine there's so much pressure. It's like playing a match. You want to make sure your body is right. There's not any mistakes. There's not any loss of focus. There's not a misstep or a missed call. But when you get to the back, and this could be the final point on this, but when it's done, match is over, all the ceremonies are done, you get to the back. What's that adrenaline dump like? What's that moment like when you
Oh,
get through, you finally walk through and you have a job, a mission completed?
it feels so great. It's like it's probably the same feeling as like you have run a marathon and you pass the finish line without getting injured or not quitting. So I mean, the feeling is just tremendous. And then of course, all people come up to you and congratulate you. And then of course, in the Wimbledon, you have to on the Sunday night, then you have to go to the Wimbledon ball. You have to put on your tuxedo. The club brings you up to a special room. I did that before the match to try my tuxedo and everything. Now the match is over. Then you have to go to the champions dinner. It's an unbelievable feeling. It's a feeling that you cannot imagine. I mean, how good you feel about it and how proud you are of yourself. And but then you have to realize that you're never better than the next match. Then the next week I went to Newport to a grass court tournament, and suddenly you come there and you have to umpire somebody who's ranked 103 in the world on an outside court, and then you have to give them the same service as you did in the Wimbledon final. That's the most important, to be consistent in every match, and the player should know that he's treating me the same way that he's treating Roger Federer and Andy Roddick.
Lars Graff here on Tennis Channel Inside In. He's the tournament director now of the Beijing combined event. It's a really exciting event, going to be on Tennis Channel September 25th to October 6th. ATP umpire, was an ATP official for a long time too. He was a tour umpire as well. So 2012, let's get kind of into where we are now. 2012, you decide to stop as an umpire. The last match was that tour finals match between Djokovic and Federer. You end up working as an ATP supervisor. How did you get on this path that we're currently on, Lars, that you are now a tournament director? 2020 was when Beijing came to be, but what got you into the game in this role as a tournament director? What kind of piqued your interest about getting on the other side here?
I think, when I stopped as umpire 2012, then I moved to Florida. I started working in the Ponte Vedra office, and I was doing a supervisor, and I was getting more into administration, working with, the ATP tour staff on administration. I went to a lot of meetings. I went to the tournament director meetings. I was dealing a lot with ITF and WTA at that time. And I was working as a supervisor, and as a supervisor, you are in a different position as a chair umpire because it's more administration. It's a different kind of diplomacy. With the players, you have to have one diplomacy, but now you work with the people from the WTA, and you have to respect that they have a different rule concerning the time between points that the ATP has, and you have to see how you can work in a different environment. So I think I grew into the role of a tournament director because I was working in Beijing as a supervisor for many, many years. And 2019 was my last year. I worked in Beijing as a supervisor. And then I thought I had a perfect job. I was working in Florida. I was a vice president ATP, and I was living in Ponte Vedra Beach, and I thought everything was perfect. And then Beijing contacted me and asked me if I wanted to start working as a tournament director. And you think, oh God, I have the perfect job. Why do I need this? But then they tell you what you're going to do, what your responsibility will be. Suddenly, I'm responsible for all the player procurement. I'm responsible for dealing with the players and trying to get them to come to Beijing. I'm the spokesperson for the tournament, trying to make the tournament popular. So suddenly, I have an opportunity that I did not have as a chair umpire. As a chair umpire, you cannot socialize with the players. You cannot stay in the bar and have a drink with Andy Roddick, and then the next day you umpire Roddick against Federer. Because if somebody saw you having a drink with a player, then immediately they're going to say, "Oh, he's a friend of this guy."
So what was that like? What was that like when you switched for the player's perspective? Was it weird for them? Was it weird for you when you made that transition where suddenly you're sociable? Because they obviously know you. You were umpiring their matches, a lot of them with a lot of stakes on the line. What was it like when you kind of assumed this role and were socially and marketing now?
I think that was a real surprise. The toughest guys that I ever umpired, they became my best friends. Suddenly, all the guys, it doesn't matter if it was Jeff Tarango or anybody. Suddenly, when I met them at tournaments, in Wimbledon, Jeff was working for radio for BBC. Suddenly, they come up and talk to you, and I think that I have always been a player guy. I always think that the players
Mhm.
are the most important part of the sport. If we don't have top players, it doesn't matter what kind of tournaments we have. So I think that the players felt that I was, on their side. And this just gave me an opportunity to get closer to them. And I want every player, who comes to Beijing, for an example, I want them to leave Beijing satisfied that this was a great tournament. I try to welcome every player when I meet them here, and I say, welcome to Beijing. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. I want them to come here with a positive. And I know as a supervisor what the players are looking for. It's very basic things. They want a good court. They want good tennis balls. They want good food. They want transportation, who is very functional, and they want a good hotel. If those 5 basic things are there, you are at top of the game immediately. So I knew that as a supervisor. I knew what are the areas that you need to focus on to make a good tournament.
Yeah, reliability comes to mind. They want somebody in a tournament that's going to be reliable, that's going to come through on their promises. We've seen when it goes wrong. Don't have to think back too far to a certain tournament that kind of didn't meet the bill. But no, I think it's been great what you've been able to do. And on that same note, that role, Lars, from the outside just seems so all-encompassing. You're responsible for so much. You're responsible for so many roles. There's so many different things that the public has no idea about. Even the players don't know. But on that flip side, when you, again, complete a mission, it has to be that much rewarding because so much goes into every little role that when you see a good tournament, when you see Beijing get off, I think 200,000 people came to the event last year in total.
Yeah.
You have to understand, you have to probably appreciate just how special it is, and it means that much more.
Yeah, I mean, I give you an example. Yesterday, there was one person at the tournament told me, that Sinner is arriving on Saturday morning, 5:00. Are you ready to are you ready to meet him? I said, of course, I'm going to be there. He's the number 1 player in the world. He's the number 1 seed. He's the defending champion. Of course, I will be there and meet him at the airport. And that is a small thing, when he walks out of the plane. I mean, I hope he doesn't listen to this now, but when he walks out of the plane, I'm standing there and welcoming him to Beijing, and hope he had a good flight, and we take him to a hotel so he can rest. So I think you learn the things that, I have seen a lot of tournaments where tournament directors are not visible. They are in the office, and I have been supervisor at tournaments where I never saw the tournament director. This is quite amazing.
Yeah.
I want to be the opposite. I want to be that, I walk in the players' restaurant. I go and talk to the players. I ask them if there's anything I can do. I watch the matches, and they know that. I'm sitting and watching the matches. So maybe I take it a little different. I mean, I learned from some tournament directors who are very active, and some of the best ones. I learned from them, because I've been working long in the business. And I like you can learn from the umpires how to be good. I learned from Rudy Berger. I learned from Rich Kaufman. I learned from the top umpires in the world how to be a good umpire. It doesn't mean that you have to copy in them, but it's the same thing as a tournament director. I see how tournament directors are acting, and I want to be a tournament director that the players can come to me. It doesn't matter what it is. Whatever issue they have, they can come to me. And I tell them, come to me. You don't need to go to anybody else and tell them. If the internet doesn't work, come to me and we will fix it. Or if you don't like the fish or whatever in the restaurant, let's see what we can do, something. So this is my approach to it. I want the players to be happy. I want them to leave the tournament with a positive image, even if they lose.
Yeah. Keep coming back for next year. I mean, we know how popular tennis is in that region of the world, in Asia, Beijing. It's remarkably popular. This field, especially, it's the first year, Lars, as you know. I'm just letting the audience know. 1,000 event for the women. Love to see that. For the men, you got 5 of the top 6 in the field. It's going to be a remarkable thing. The fans love tennis in general, Lars, in Beijing, but they are really getting a show this year with a lot of players, still a lot to play for, coming in to show out and put on a show like only they can.
I mean, on the women's side, we have 2 girls who is fighting for the number 1 spot, Iga and Sabalenka. I mean, somebody asked me, do you think, yesterday, somebody asked me, do you think one of those girls are playing? I said, of course she's playing. This is the number 1 spot on the line here in Beijing, in Wuhan. I mean, there's 1,000 points. I mean, look at the rankings, very close. So we are very lucky that we have going to have a strong field. And of course, we cannot forget that we have the Olympic champion from China, Queen
That's,
Wen, who is playing,
yeah.
and she has been here for 2 weeks. I came not last Saturday. I came the Saturday before. I came the Saturday of US Open, whatever it was, US Open semifinals. I came that Saturday or Friday, and when I came on the site the next day, the first person I met was Queen Wen and Pere Riba, her coach. They are here practicing 2 weeks before the tournament, every day, getting ready.
It has to be special for you to see too, just how big and how special some of the top players have gotten from the Chinese side. Not just Qinwen Zheng, who's been remarkable, but you've got Yibing Wu won the tournament last year in Dallas. Zhang Zhizhen won an Olympic silver, I think, and has been doing very well. Has got a very electric game. So Chinese tennis is coming along too, and it's not just one player. They are really raising their level, and I think it starts with kids and young people getting involved and getting interested in tennis. Generations later, it's no coincidence that these players are succeeding.
No, you forgot Jerry, who was third round US Open. He was 2 sets to none against Casper Ruud. So there are, on the men's side, we had 3 guys. There was actually a fourth one, Boo, who is 120 in the world. And on the women's side, it's going to be a record of 8 women in the main draw this year, 8 Chinese women. So tennis is a big sport here, and the Chinese people like sport in general. So they're going to come in. I'm sure we're going to break the record from last year, because I hear that the ticket sales are very, very high. I mean, there are some sessions that are already sold out. The semifinals and the finals, and of course, whenever Queen Wen plays her first match, I can tell you people are going to do anything to get a ticket for her first match.
She's got some real flair. I like it. She's got some flair and some style to her game too. Yeah. One of the other things I should point out too, that part of your role and part of just being, the perfect guy for this role, Lars, you fought really hard to keep it at this point on the schedule, because there was, the tennis schedule is tough real estate. There's a lot happening. It's tough to find time to play tournaments. There's always moving parts. But why was it so important for you to say, no, this is where it needs to be? This is the time to play the Beijing Open.
The first reason was that it's a holiday now. Next week, it's called the Golden Week. So it's a holiday when the Chinese people have 5 days off. And of course, when people don't have to work, we will have more people watching the tennis just because of that. And I noticed already in the past that when they make US Open always make these fan surveys. Mm-hmm. Who is going to US Open to watch matches, and they say that the average income of the US Open spectator is more than $100,000. Here at the tennis, the families come. I have never seen any tennis tournament with so many families. The mother, the father, and the kids are coming here and watch tennis. And I knew that it's so important to be in this week because of the holiday, because the kids are not in school, the parents have time off, and they can bring the kids to the tennis. So, and of course, the parents will bring the kids to the tennis. Many of them, the kids have a dream. They want to play tennis themselves. And I see we have a lot of tournaments, junior tournaments here. We call it the Diamond Cup after our center court. And this Diamond Cup is kids, 12-year-old, 10-year-old, 14-year-old, they play tennis, and I go and watch them. We have tournaments every other week here. And I can see, the energy I saw yesterday or 2 days ago when I was walking around on the outside course. I could see the parents sitting there, having their sandwiches and having their coffee, and the kids were playing tennis. And I was thinking, all of those kids have a dream, and I'm sure the parents have a dream too. And that dream doesn't have to be a professional player. That dream can also be a college player. So there are so many different jobs in the tennis you see. And last year there was a Chinese girl who won the NCAA from I think from UCLA, or she's from California somewhere. So I think that there is a dream, and sport is very, very important in this part of the world. The kids love sport, and the parents are playing tennis also themselves. So maybe they are where the Western world were 30, 40 years ago. Now there are so many other things that kids in America and kids in Sweden do. But here, tennis is a huge sport for them.
Yeah, it could be like the same thing as a 14-year-old kid in Sweden in 1974 that just finds the game, finds that spark that sets off a life in tennis. I think
Yes,
it's great. I think it's awesome, Lars Graff. This has been a very fun podcast. Just the last thing I wanted to ask you. I read your interview, your article with the great Steve Flank. The direct quote is, your love for the sport is undisputed. So we're at this point now. We have the 50-year anniversary of you kind of getting the bug and getting the itch. It seems like that light is still shining bright, and you're still as dedicated as ever to the sport of tennis.
for sure I am. I'm really. I think every day I learn something new, and I think this job has, given me I wouldn't say second chance, but officiating was great. I loved officiating, but I'm really happy that I took this step because now I have so much energy and I'm learning so much every day about how to run tennis tournaments, how the sport is governed, and the balance between ATP, WTA, the Grand Slams. It's a completely new world. I mean, sometimes when I told Steve Simon, when I go to the meetings, I feel like I'm back in at university. I'm listening to all these speeches about the marketing, about the IT, about television, about streaming, whatever it is. I'm just soaking it in, and I'm learning. And it's my love is undisputed for the sport, and I hope I will stay many more years in tennis. I have no thoughts about retiring. I think this is such a great sport, and I hope I can be here for many years.
Yeah, the game is lucky to have you. We're glad you're not retiring anytime soon. And that's a great lesson to end on. You can always learn at every stage of your life. There's always time to learn and gain and soak up more knowledge. So, Lars Graff, pleasure chatting with you. Pleasure meeting you for the first time here on Tennis Channel Inside In. A reminder, the Beijing Open, September 25th, October 6th, will be on Tennis Channel. A lot of great players on both the men's and the women's side, a combined event in Asia, the only one of its kind. Should be just a classic event. Lars Graff, thanks for coming on Tennis Channel Inside In. It was fun chatting tennis with you here on the podcast.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this chat we had here, and I'm looking forward to the tournament, and it's going to be very exciting next 2 weeks. We have some very good players coming here, and there's going to be a lot of stories written here.